Welcome everyone to Growth Hacking 101. Today we are exploring how to unlock every bit of growth potential in your business. Growth hacking is all about making small changes to your product, your messaging, and your strategies, and then testing these changes continuously to see what works best. Growth hacking is all about finding new ways to attract, keep, and earn more from your customers, whether by tweaking your product based on their feedback or using cutting edge technologies like machine learning and AI. So let's start growth hacking. Today, what are we going to be focusing as under Growth Hacking 101? What our focus is, the idea is that at the end of this session, you would have imbibed the growth hacking philosophy for your venture today itself, right? And to do this, I have made sure that I give you a lot of examples of other startups or globally who have done this, right? What are we going to be learning? We're focusing on a little bit deeper understanding of what growth hacking is, prerequisites for growth hacking, so that we prep ourselves, and we're looking at growth hacking across 3 stages: acquisition stage, retention stage, and monetization stages. We're going to cover all the 3, where a lot of focus will be on acquisition, but we're going to cover the other 2 also. And I'm also going to be sharing somewhere the 80th percentage point about growth hacking to start your growth hacking itself. So help you get you started into this, right? So this is what we're going to be covering today. So now let's get started with today's session. Okay. The first question is, what is growth hacking? So on your screen, I've got different definitions or aspects of growth hacking. Okay. And I'm not going to read it all. I'm sure you guys can read it yourself. But what I would like you to share with me now, just unmute and start sharing with me now, is from what is on your screen and what you have put on Mentimeter. Okay, what stands out to you? What are the things that is clearly saying, hey, this is something which I have not considered?
Customer retention, ma'am?
Yes. So one is that growth hacking is not just about acquisition, but it is also about retention. Yes. What else?
Quick turnaround time in terms of servicing the customer?
Quick turnaround time. No, sorry, that is nothing. Where did you get that from?
I'm just thinking, say, for example, if a customer comes to me with a query on my product, if I can quickly turn around and give him a solution or an offering, that could be what I'm trying to, in terms of customer retention.
Got that, retention. Okay. So now let's just focus on the definition of growth hacking. Okay. Not the
process,
the specific instances, but there's the general definition. Like you said, first thing, it is also about retention and not just about acquiring customers, right? So that's one thing which was clear distinction from what we generally think growth hacking is and what it really is. Anything else that stands out to you? Anybody here?
Understanding customer profile.
Yes, Ankur?
Understanding customer profile, matching to the product needs, and finding the right TG, basically.
Correct. There's a deep knowledge of customer. In fact, growth hacking is impossible for you to do without having a deep knowledge of your customer itself, because it all stems from the knowledge of the customer, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that also throughout the session today. Anything else that is standing out?
Yeah, so growth hacking sounds to me like a very smart way of doing something which the others have not seen and trying to crack a code and get ahead, right? So that's the whole point. So that needs, of course, a lot of knowledge of the customer, a lot of data, some kind of a different way of analyzing what is there in front of us and doing it better than others.
Perfect, Rob. Yes, absolutely.
I think finding the low-hanging solutions and faster scalable solutions which are low-hanging, basically, both together.
Yeah, this is where talking about low-hanging is that where you can have quick turnarounds, there. Yes, that is a part of growth hacking also. Connected to that is also about implementing low cost strategies, right? So you're doing so that you are able to, by implementing low cost strategies, the idea is to gain as much as possible. So low input, high outputs, right? That is also a part of growth hacking. It's not about investing huge amount of money in marketing and retention, etc., and strategy, but also about doing quick strategies, small hacks, small tweakings, which can give us a disproportional growth as such, right? That is one part of it. There's another thing that I want you to notice from this definition, okay? That it is not just about growing your revenue, but also about converting your customers into passionate ambassadors. Okay, so it's not just about revenue growth, but it is also about what will make your customers want to talk about you, so that you create an engine for word of mouth growth. That's another piece which I want you to notice about this. Third piece of it, if you see the point, which is the third point, okay, it's about designing your product itself in such a manner that your users are incentivized to promote the product itself. It's related to the passionate ambassadors itself, right? So here, if you see, you're not just focusing on customers, but also focusing on your product itself. So it's not just about marketing, it's also about your product development. Okay, are you seeing the differences now between what we generally think about growth hacking, and how much more depth there is about growth hacking? Are you able to see the differences now? Okay, so let's move forward now. Here is an example of I'm trying to share a couple of examples throughout. Okay, this example is about Dropbox, one of the early adopters of Dropbox, and it is quite often they are quoted in there, right? So what did they do was they offered more storage space if you promoted Dropbox by sharing or by inviting your friends to join Dropbox. Okay, so what did they do was they incentivized the users to promote their product. Okay, and this is one of the first cases, and in just 14 months, and with absolutely no traditional marketing spend, Dropbox grew its users from just 1 lakh users to 4 million users in 14 months. And that is why a small hack did not take much of their investments, money for that to offer this. But at the same time, the growth that they got was huge. Okay. And when they did that, it was not, and they also made it very easy for their users to invite their friends. So that was the second part of it. Not just telling them to do it, but also making it very easy to do it. And they also spread this message across different pages of their website, not just in the sign up page, but even when they were trying to upgrade their accounts, they kept pushing this back to the customer, to the users, right? So this is a simple hack that people talk about. Okay. There's another one, which is one of the Hotmail. How many of you remember Hotmail? How many of you have a Hotmail account?
I used to till they deleted it all.
Yes. So would you remember the signature that was there? Right? It at the bottom. P.S. I love you, and get your free email at Hotmail. Right? It was one of the first time. Of course, today everybody has it, but this was a simple hack which did not cost them anything. This was a hyperlink that they introduced in the emails. And then, of course, this was also the reason lots of customers signed up easily. Okay. So, similarly, today, if you see, you've got this thing that's sent from my iPhone, sent from my OnePlus phone. These are all simple hacks that that organizations use to ensure that the product itself becomes its own marketing system. Okay. Let me share one more example. Airbnb. The Airbnb had a very slow start initially because the concept of sharing your house to strangers was very bizarre, right? Now, interestingly, what one of the software engineers at Airbnb came up was that they could get more traffic to all their listings by cross-publishing this on Craigslist. Okay, and what the engineers also did was that every time there was a post which was searching for short vacations, short-term stays, vacation rentals or something like that, it displayed the Airbnb listings. So this was again something which did not cost them much at all, but because of that, they were able to sign up huge, of course, offer a lot of their properties for rentals, and also to attract new hosts to be a part of this, right? This Airbnb is again one of the most common stories. The Craigslist cross-pollination, it's a very famous story which shows the value of growth hacking. I don't think I can talk about Indian startups specifically right now, but I'll try and see what I could come up with on Harsh. Okay, so now before we jump into the creating our own growth hacking plans, let's look at what is the prerequisite that you need to have before you start creating your own growth hacking. One of the most prerequisite of growth hacking is that your product must be a must-have product. Okay, and what does it mean? It starts with ensuring that you have a product market fit. Okay, so I think all of us are in that space. We've already done this exercise earlier also about product market fit. So you know that there is a market there is a problem, and there is a market which your product can address. So, but how do you do this here is, how do you ensure that your product is a must-have product? The first question that you ask yourself, is your product a must-have? What does it mean? That is there a core value that your product offers to the customer, to your TG? Second, why is it a core? Why is it important to the customer? And third one, who is that customer? Okay, now it sounds very obvious. Of course, we do all of these things. Okay, but in reality, and having as a business mentor, when I work with a lot of, not with startups, even with the SMEs, I see people struggling with this core value. Okay, a core value which is not just a value for us, but it is important to the target customer. Okay, and whether they are reaching out to that target customer, especially as startups, right? We struggle with this. One is, of course, it takes time to understand who is the target customer, understand what is important to them, and then understand what's the value that you can provide. So like in the reverse order. Okay. Aside from this, what also happens is that as startups, there is a lot of demand from us in terms of raising funds, or just proving ourselves in order to raise funds, okay, or just to generate revenues to keep afloat. So we are so focused on the revenue part of it, or on the fund part of it, that sometimes we miss out on these three clear definitions which is required. Okay, and without this, what happens is, if we don't have a must-have product, okay, what can happen is we'll end up pushing our growth too soon. And when that happens is, you'll end up either spending a lot of time and money on pushing a product which may not be important to the customer. Okay, and second, when you do get some early customers, okay, they become disillusioned because they have signed up because your marketing was good, your positioning was good, but when they come inside and they experience your product, they realize that it is not as good as what they thought it was. Okay, so it is important for us to have a must-have product. So how do you know right now? How would you know that you have a must-have product? It's a simple survey that we recommend. Okay, the growth hackers recommend. It's asking one single question, asking your existing users one single question: how disappointed would you be if this product no longer existed tomorrow? And you give them these 4 options. Right? Now notice here, we're using the word disappointed. It's different from your customer CSAT score or a customer satisfaction score. In CSAT, we're asking how satisfied they are. Here it's the opposite. We're asking them how disappointed would they be. We're looking at the negative side of it. Okay, and so here and when you get your results, let's see what happens. Right? If you're getting more than 40% of your users say that they are going to be very disappointed, then it means that you have achieved the must-have status. Your product has achieved the must-have status, and that means now you're ready to get into the growth plans, the growth hacking, creating a growth hacking systems for your organization. Okay. However, if between 25 to 40% are saying that they're going to be disappointed, then that means that you need some tweaks are required. Okay, you need to make some changes either in the product or the language that is used to describe that product. And we will talk a little bit more about the language little later today. Lastly, if less than 25% are answering that they are going to be very disappointed, then this means that either you've got the audience completely wrong or your product itself is wrong to them, and that needs a lot of substantial development that has to be taken, and you're just definitely not ready for a growth push. Okay, so I purposely have shared this because I want you today to go back and do this exercise with your existing users to understand, to figure out if you have a must-have product. For those of you who will get a result which is less than 25%, you can then do a more follow-up survey, and this survey could be even on a phone call, or it could be a survey format, asking questions like, what would you likely use as an alternative if you no longer if you don't have this product? Yes, JD, what's the question?
Hi, so we are in the B2B space, and this is a very interesting survey because it's very short and quick. We have 6 paying customers. What do you think the sample size should be to make some sensible, to use this information more?
Okay, B2B, 6 paying customers, and how long have they been your customer?
Since November 23.
23. Okay. So since you have only 6, it's best for you to start with those 6 and start with them. There's another option where I'm going to be sharing some more questions in this slide, where if you want to go a little bit more deep dive on what exactly do they value, you can use these additional questions also. And since there are 6, my advice would be, instead of a survey, have a phone call or a meeting with them, because you'll get lots more information there. Okay.
Awesome.
Yes, Dhaval.
I found that survey really interesting. But the one slide before that, you had mentioned that your product should be a must-have product.
Correct.
Right. Now, I'm assuming all of us are doing something new and something different. And so when we first launched the product, if it was a must-have product, then maybe somebody else should have already done it, or maybe it's there. And when we first launch it, it can never be a must-have, right? It's like no one's going to think of it as a must-have because they've lived their lives so far without whatever you've built. So now, once you've got some customers, then by definition, does it not become a not must-have because they've lived it before, and now some things are better, some things are being done in a nicer way, and I'm just saying this because we are also a B2B SaaS kind of platform. So then, how do we think of this from a must-have perspective? Like, I think the disappointment piece makes a lot of sense to me, but how do I think of it from a must-have perspective?
Well, let's look at this slide and hopefully it'll answer your questions. Okay. So let's assuming that you have these questions or that your results have come out less, then these are the questions that you're going to follow up with. Okay. One is, what is the alternative that you're going? By asking this question, okay, you're figuring out who is the competition, who's the chief competition, who has probably achieved the must-have status with your customers or closer to the must-have status compared to you. That's one. Okay, and once you've understood who's the competition, then there is a lot more research that you can do there. Second question, and based on their answer, you can do that, is that what is the primary benefit that you receive from that product? Okay, so that you understand that what is important to the customer. Remember, what is the core value which is important to the customer? And this would help you uncover those what features you can build in. Okay, or if you already have those features but you're not talking about them, then you can start talking about them or bring it to the forefront of your messaging and your communication. Okay, or it could just be a simple tweak in your offering itself to get that understand to bring the primary benefit of. Okay, have you recommended this product to the competition, the other product you're talking about, to anyone? This would help you understand if there is an opportunity for word of mouth virality for your product itself. If there is a product, competition product, but it does not have a word of mouth virality, then you know that there is something that which even the competition has not been able to hack, and you need to work on that. That could become one of your growth goals, for example. Okay. If they say yes, we have recommended it, then ask them to describe how they recommend it. Now, this is important because this will uncover the language that the customer is using. And I will talk again, there's multiple examples I'm going to be giving you about this, which makes you understand how do they value or describe, how do they describe value, or how are they seeing value from their perspective. Okay, and sometimes all that you need to do is tweak a little bit of that value, that language into your own value propositions. Okay, the other question that you can ask is, what type of person do you think will benefit? This will help you identify the right customer target. Okay, then the last one is, how can we improve our own products to better meet your needs? This is a typical feedback question, but based on a little bit of research that prior questions has given you. And lastly, of course, is that if you're doing a survey, request if you can also follow up an email or meet up with them for more responses. So this, I hope, Dhaval, will help you understand that these are the other questions that you can ask. And or for if you have just 6 paying customers, these are additional questions that you can go a deep dive in. Instead of talking about competition, ask the same questions regarding your own product. Okay, and believe me, these kind of customer interviews, I call them the customer interviews, they are so valuable. In fact, if it's a B2B, then different personas of your customer, you should be if it's just handful of customers, like 6 B2B customers, but if you're talking to multiple people within that organization, could be the procurement team, the management, the user, ask these questions to each one of these and see what kind of responses that you'll get. I'm sure you'll have some eye-opening moments over here. Okay, this is also something which I use when I'm talking about customer perspective, applying customer perspective in your business. This is one of the models that I use. Okay. So the first one we said was about understanding your the must-have products. Second one is what we call the growth levers, right? So understand which metrics will matter most when you're looking at your growth. Okay. So here we've got 2 metrics. One is the North Star metric, and one is the OMTM, which is called the one metric that matters. So the North Star metric focuses on something which is applicable to their entire organization over a long period of time. In fact, even infinity. Okay. The second one is what we call the one metric that matters, which is a shorter period of a metric which will follow for a shorter period of time, focusing on smaller aspects of your business, or it could be in specific teams or specific departments, etc. And you can have multiple OMTMs over a period of time. So, like example, team 1 will have one OMTM that they're going to focus on one metric for 3 months. Once they achieve that, then they move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. And this could be applicable for different teams. Okay, so this is what we call the growth levers. Now, one thing over here is revenue alone is a very poor North Star metric, or even a one metric for a short period of time is okay, but North Star metric revenue alone is not a very good metric. The reason is revenue is a price that your customers pay. Okay, whereas when you're looking at North Star metric, it has to be a value that the customer is getting for the amount that they are paying. Okay, so for example, if you just focus on increasing your revenue, okay, it will mean that you may get customers onboarded, but initially, but if the customer is not getting any value out of this, okay, that revenue is short term. You will not be able to replicate that revenue success in the future. Okay, so let me show you some examples here. If you look at these are familiar examples you would have seen. Okay, Facebook has monthly active users. That is the North Star metric. And what do they mean by active? Why they're using the word active? So they're just not looking at any number of users, but they're looking at how many active users, because that the people who are engaged is what is more important for them on Facebook. Okay. In fact, LinkedIn has something else. Even they have adopted same thing as monthly active users, and Slack has converted that to daily active users because they want people to Slack to be a habit which is used every day at work. Okay, Spotify is about time spent listening. Amazon is number of purchases per month. Quora, number of answers to questions. Okay, so if you see all of these, the North Star metrics are actually what you want your customers to do on your platform. You want people to listen to music, make purchases, answer questions, book per night, ride, etc. So you're looking at what you want your customers to do. And this is something, remember, this is a long-term step. Means they have to keep doing this. And that is the example of North Star metrics. Okay. We've already established, that it is also about the product. It's not just the marketing piece of it. So the growth hacking team will comprise of somebody from the marketing team, from the product development team, your engineering team, and the analytics team. Okay. Remember, I gave you the example of Airbnb. It was a software engineer in their team who was able to create that hack. Right? So why do we need these different teams? Because each of these teams come in with their own strength. Okay. Now we need all these strengths to create hacks for our own growth. Now, as startups, I know it could be a challenge for us to have separate teams doing all of these. Okay. Many a times we are playing all these roles, right? So here's another way for you to look at what is it that we need to do? Why do we need this, and how do we bring this about? Okay. First one is we need somebody who understands user behavior, knowing how our customers use our products, what will they value about it, how will they talk about it, what will they look out for, what is the expectations. That's why we want marketing doing that. Okay. Second one is to convert those expectations into a product offering, a feature or a product, etc. is why we need a product team. Engineering is because, of course, product team does that, but how will we actually develop that and make that happen at the code level is where the engineering team comes in. And analyticals is when at the very fundamental level, okay, growth hacking is all about analyzing and gaining insights from the data which is which is inside the organization and outside. So analytics is a very core part, always analyzing. In fact, many times we start with analyzing as a situation and then identify opportunities for us. So that's why we need, in the growth team, we need all these different people. Okay, so as a startup, you may not have different team members, but I ensure that these kind of skill sets are available for your growth team to actually be successful. So example here is of LinkedIn. They started with a 5-people growth team, and today they have a team of 120 people focusing only on growth, and it is across all the different functions. Okay, but what they've also done is that they have divided their growth under 5 umbrellas, and each growth team focuses only on that. So this is an example of how big your growth team can focus upon. Okay, now initially when we spoke about what is growth hacking, we also spoke of, somebody mentioned it's a systematic process, right? So what is the system? So this systematic process is called the growth cycle. Okay, so what happens with the growth cycle is we start with the problem, a problem which is limiting or constricting our growth. Okay, and when we start trying to analyze and identify that, we will go through we'll end up identifying lots of these friction areas. And this is irrespective of whether we are a startup or a growth organization. Okay, so we'll identify multiple growth problems, and we need to then pick one of them which we are going to focus upon. Then we're going to look at multiple experiments that we will conduct to solve that particular problem. Again, we'll have multiple experiments, or we'll have to choose which experiments we want to do. Remember, we're saying low-cost experiments to give us big impacts. We need to do a lot of search and there also. And then lastly, once we have identified and done the experiments and see which of those experiments have succeeded, we're looking at how do we scale those experiments and make it a part of the organization itself, right? So again, we are going to go through a lot of iterations over there. Okay, so this is a broad growth cycle that we are going to follow. Now, quickly, let's hack some of the hacking myths itself. Okay. First one, we've already established, it is not just about bringing new customers, but it is also about retaining customers. It's also about monetizing those customers. It in turn means it's not just about marketing. We've established it is also about product development also. It is about customer services. It's actually about, it goes across the entire organization. Third, sometimes we believe, and I've seen this happen quite a lot of times, that people believe that we will hire one growth hacker. He or she will come and do some jadoo miracle, and we'll suddenly start having a huge growth. The reality we've established is that first of all, the growth hacking is always a team effort. It requires different perspectives, marketing, engineering, product development, analytics, etc., for it to actually win. Connected to that, believing that growth hacking is just one solution. I gave the example of Airbnb or Dropbox. Okay, and so people assume that just finding that one single hack will change our entire game. No, it's not going to happen. The reality is that growth hacking is a series of small wins and a series of small losses also, right? And then bringing them together so that we have a compounding effect, and that is the one which triggers our growth. So it's never going to be one single solution. In fact, Airbnb and Dropbox made so many changes before they were able to arrive at the ones which actually work for them, right? The last one is that people believe growth hacking is all about breaking the rules. In fact, when I was researching some of the comments for this session, I found somebody's a whole thought process around breaking the rules, right? And trying to find a backdoor entry, flouting the rules. All of that, I've seen a lot of them people doing that. The reality is that growth hacking is all about thinking outside the box, and it does not mean that we are looking at something which is which is bordering on illegal or something unethical. It's not about that at all. Okay, so now let's figure out how do we actually go about doing our growth hacking. So I mentioned about, remember, analysis, like being a very fundamental part of our growth hacking itself. So we are looking at how do we analyze data, analyze where we are, where do we want to be, analyzing internal data versus external data. And this would mean that as startups, even if you're not ready to do the growth hacking, right now, we need to put in processes and systems that will be able to capture that data. So one of the stumbling blocks I've seen with organizations is that they don't have any data except to existing data or customer data to analyze, because of which a lot of their growth hacking premises are assumptions. Okay, so that is one thing that I would like for all of you to take on, is that create data, capture data in whatever raw format that you can also, but capture that so that it will help you in the future for your growth hacking. Second one is ideating. The other aspect of growth hacking is what we call the accelerated ideating, right? Gathering or generating a lot of ideas quickly, okay, and not just looking at the full-fledged answers, getting everything right from the day one itself, but quickly finding ideas and then experimenting on those ideas, prioritizing which of the ideas you want to experiment on, prioritizing which experiments will give you results, quicker results, etc. Right? So then last one is, of course, running those experiments and figuring and identifying what is the learning from them, and again going back to analyzing. So this is a constant cycle, okay, which will help us create continuous improved growth for our organization. So this is the very premise of growth hacking. They analyzing it, ideating what can be done about the problem, analyzing, identifying problems, ideating on how to solve those problems, creating multiple experiments, prioritizing which experiments you're going to focus on this month, this time frame, etc., and then running those experiments and then learning from the experiments and going back to analysis. So this is the very premise of growth hacking. It's completely different from what we do only with marketing. Marketing is only about going out, but if you see, growth hacking is a lot more than that. So here are some good examples for you. BitTorrent had identified that they were not they were struggling to convert free customers into paid customers, to upgrade from a free plan to a paid plan. Okay, and when they hired a growth marketer, she was able to identify, when she did an analysis, spoke to customers, do the survey, customer service, etc. They were surprised to find that the number one reason that customers was that for not upgrading was they did not know that there was an upgrade option. It sounds so silly to us, but that was what came out. And what did they do? They just simply highlighted the upgrade button on the home page. That's all. And that led to a 92% increase in revenue. Okay, but remember, the focus was the impact came because of the analysis that they were able to do. Etsy, it's a platform where for independent artisans, right? What they did was they physically went and they had discussions with the various artisans, and they were able to discover that many of these talented artisans were members of a very tight-knit circles, social circles. So they decided to build online community forums so that there is a communication between the sellers. So that was their learning. Okay, Pinterest started as an actually traditional e-commerce platform. Like, it was called Tote, and when they analyzed their data and their behavior of the customer, they realized that the users were collecting all the the collections was there about what they wanted instead of actually buying them, right? And so they realized that Pinterest, what is that? It completely shifted its entire business model itself, and it converted from selling to just browsing and pinning. The entire revenue model completely changed because of the way people are analyzing their customers. So these are 3 good examples of different things that people were able to do by focusing on growth hacking. Okay, so now let's focus on growth hacking your acquisitions. So once we have put together a growth team, we've identified what is the growth levers. We've done enough of testing to establish that our product is a must-have. Okay, now let's start looking at the growth hacking itself. Okay, so to start acquiring new customers rapidly, aside from your product market fit, there are 2 other fits that we need. One is the language market fit. This is what I told you. I'm going to be giving you examples, right? It means describing your product in a manner that resonates with your customers also. So they, in other words, using language which they are familiar with or which they will use. In fact, if you remember what we said in the survey also, ask the customers to describe the value. So that's basically what you're doing, is capturing the language market fit. The second one is which channels are you going to be using to reach your target audience, especially in today's world where we have so many different marketing channels. Which market are you going to focus upon? And last one is on designing loops, so that the product itself, remember we said product itself markets itself, and we're going to talk about how do we do that, and we'll try and identify hacks for each one of these. So let's start with the language market fit. Now, when I say language market fit, is this not about your tagline? People assume it's always the tagline. It is not. It's about every place in your website or app where you're communicating with the customer. Okay, whether it's a notification, whether it's a onboarding welcome email, whether it's a reminder email, whether it's any kind of a pop-ups in your product itself, anything that you're talking about, it has to resonate with the language of your customers. Okay, recently when I was talking to a startup in the health and fitness space, very interesting. There were 2 founders, co-founders. One was coming from a technology background. The other one was actually a sports person. Okay, and when I looked at their website, and they share a lot of they also shared the customer pitch with me. I asked them that the co-founder who comes from a technology and a management background, I asked, did he write all the content over there? And he said yes. Okay, so during that mentoring session, I asked the other co-founder who came from the sports background, how would you describe the value proposition of your product? Okay, and the way he described was completely different from the dry, cut out, high jargon words which was used by the other co-founder. And they were able to quickly see that, how the customers were viewing their website vis-a-vis the customers were all these sports person itself, right? So sports enthusiasts. So that's a simple example of how we were quickly able to establish that there was a language market misfit in that case. Okay. The other example I can give you is about, of course, can somebody say what's this product on the screen? Do you recognize what is the product on the screen? Yes, iPod, right? Correct. So when Steve Jobs introduced the iPod, this is the actual definition of the iPod. Okay, portable music player, weighing 6.5 ounces, size of a sardine can, voluminous capacity, long battery life, lightning fast transfer speeds, a lot of jargon, right? I'm not a techie person, but that does not excite me at all. Okay, but what did Steve Jobs use? 100 songs in your pocket. simple, and it's a language which also showed value. The value, very clear value, right? There is value even in the jargon, but it's a value that has to be deciphered. Whereas 100 songs in your pocket, there is no requirement to break it down to understand what it is. In fact, there is a curiosity on how can you do that. That's a very classic example of a language market fit. Now, if you are wondering how can I achieve, do I have a language market fit? Here's a simple test. Okay, start with your headlines itself, because that's what first we can do, and then we can break it down to other parts of the entire communication. Okay, if you are using a sentence that says our product is, whether you're using it when you're verbally introducing it, or on your website, or on your app, or on your advertisement and thing, remember you're using your language. You're not saying what a customer is. So how do you convert this around? Say if your headline is the second half of this statement, now you can, or I wish I could, or someday I hope to, then we are using the language market of the language of the customer. So let me show this with an example. Okay, in the B2B case, okay, Unbounce will say convert more leads, create customer landing pages, no coding required. Okay, so here, if you can see, if you can imagine that the customer is saying, I wish I could convert more leads, create custom landing pages without any coding. Right? That means they have achieved the custom language, the language market fit. Or let's say in the B2C case, okay, someday I hope to kick bad habits and get healthy ones. That's an example of saying that, okay, yes, you've achieved your language market fit. So this could be something which is applicable for B2B or B2C. So one simple test that you can go and try for and see the way you're positioning yourself itself. Where does it fit? Or have you achieved your language market fit or not? Okay. Then we go to the channel market fit. Now, as I said, we've got so many distribution channels to choose from, and just because of that, the cost of acquisition has increased hugely for us, right? And I think last time I did share about how do you identify which channels to use. So a little extension of that is this channel matrix that you can create. Okay, and here we've got some 7 parameters of the channel that we are measuring. First one is cost. Okay, so what is the cost? Is there an upfront cost? Is there an ongoing cost? Is there a minimum spend? Okay, for example, if you're looking at a blog sponsorship, it may cost you an upfront amount. Okay, but if you're running, you can run a Facebook ad as low as some 100 rupees also, right? So that's an example of cost. Targeting. Identify if the channel that you're choosing, does it let you target different audiences? How easy, how difficult is it for you to target different audiences? How close is that targeting to your TG? Okay. Again, another example is that ads, you see Facebook ads, Google ads, the targeting is generally very high. But when you're looking like PR, the targeting is very low because you can't control. It goes to everybody. You can't just control, it goes to particular segment itself. And that brings us to control. The control, identifying how much control do you have on the channel itself, right? Can you turn the channel on and off? Do you depend on somebody else to do that for you? For example, again, PR. You need, you have to depend on journalists and writers to write about you. Okay. But if it's ads, it's something that you can control whenever you want to, on off today, in the next half an hour, the next 10 minutes also, right? More control means that it is easier and faster for you to run your experiments. Then we have input time. This means the upfront time that you require to start experimenting. How much time, for example, it could be the time that will take for you to build the technology, to use the technology, to create content, to create creatives, etc. Right? So when we're looking at, for example, Google Ads, it's very the input time is very low. You can quickly we don't need tech, and we can quickly do that in a short period of time. Of course, if you're familiar with that, okay. Whereas if you're looking at content writing, the input time is longer. It takes you a lot more. Yes, today with AI, when that is changing, yes, but it takes a lot more time for us comparatively. Okay. Output time is the time it takes for you to start getting data out of these different experiments. So it could also mean the number of experiments that you need to get the right amount of data to make decisions. Okay. So again, with ads, the output time is really very low. You can immediately start seeing results, good or bad, but you will see the results, right? So that's the example of output time. And scale is the scale of the channel itself. How large is the channel in terms of volume, and how much of your own time and resources would it require for you to scale up in that? Okay, so that's the 7 parameters. Now, ideally, in the perfect world, you want your costs and your input and output time to be low, but you want a high control, high targeting options, and high scalability options. Okay, so what you can do, but the reality is different, right? So what you do is you write all the various channels that you want to explore on the vertical side, right, in the columns, and then you start simply marking whether it is high or low or medium. You do that for each of the different channels, and based on which one is the closest to the ideal world, you can choose your channels, right? Now, let me also give you one more example here. Now, depending upon the industry that you are at, the competitors that are there in your market, the same matrix may mean different to different organizations. For example, if you take the SEO and the scale combination, right? If you're a SaaS tool, let's say like a help desk, okay, then your SEO to scale will typically be very low, because it's very specific words that you need to use. It's not very easy to scale up on that. But if you are a travel review site, okay, then the scale to SEO ratio will generally be high, because it's very easy to use long tail content and gain that scalability for your platform. So each channel for your business will have a different connotation. So this is something which will be exclusive to your organization. Okay. Now the last part, I've seen a lot of organizations do the channel market fit. Okay. They struggle with the language market fit, but they use it for positioning and they miss out on the others. But this third one, I very rarely see organizations do. Okay. And this can be a game changer if you're not doing this right now, which is how do we make users share our products with their personal network. This is not like a word of mouth, but we are actually actively looking at the users doing an action where they are taking our products and sharing it with their personal networks. Okay, like I gave you the example of Dropbox. Invite others, okay, to share your documents and earn so much extra GB of storage space, making it easy to share it also. And today, if you see, most of us use the share button. That is actually one of the hacks, which is around acquisition itself, right? It's become so common we don't think about it, but it was something which was initially done, which was a great hack when it comes to customer. So how do we do that? How do we create this customer loop? That means each customer bringing in more customers. How do we get that happening? So first one is to think about the network effects. Like Dropbox, Eventbrite, if you know, it's a platform where we have events are published and then we can go and buy tickets Okay, so they also did the same thing. They went one step ahead and they created a social driven loop by encouraging the ticket buyers to share with their friends that they're going to an event. Okay, and because of this, they put it on the social media. I'm going for this event. I'm going here. It also, what happens is, also brought in more gave more eyeballs to the event, and because of this, there were more ticket buyers. Okay, and of course, for the buyer itself, it's always more fun to have more friends join in for that event, right? So they created that. Second one, that whatever you do, whatever that your incentives that you're offering, okay, if you like Dropbox offered that you will get more storage space, it has to connect with your product's core value. What I mean by that is, Dropbox would also have said that we will give you 10% off on your own subscription if you refer somebody, which is what a lot of us are using right now, right? But there's a problem with that money thing. One is that maybe the 10% is not a big deal for somebody, so there's no value on it. Okay. Two, it makes a person realize, oh, this is the value that they are giving me. It's a very small, minuscule value, some $10, $5. Who cares? Why will I do that? Right? Okay. So that is why the incentive that you're offering has to be something which is a part of your core value itself, which is where Dropbox was additional space. Okay. That's one. The second one is that it has to be a part of your total experience, not an add-on. For example, LinkedIn. The moment we sign up on LinkedIn immediately says, would you want to invite your friends? LinkedIn is using invitations, right? That's like Dropbox. But they say, as part of your sign up itself, it's telling you, would you want to invite more people on your network? Whether it's your social, they give you the connections through your Facebook network, their personal network, etc. Or if you're using the mobile app, your mobile network also. So it's made it a part of it. It's not something like it's an afterthought. Now, Airbnb did the opposite of Dropbox. Airbnb said that if you invite other people to be a part of the Airbnb experience, then both the inviter and the invitee get $25 off on their next booking on Airbnb. They use the money option. Okay, but the reason that it was in synergy with the product's core value was Airbnb was actually offering what? An alternative to expensive hotels, a more economic option to hotels, which is why the product's core value and the $25 incentive was in line. That is one. The second thing is the way Airbnb sent out the invite. So when they send out the invite, the picture of the person who's inviting was also a part of that and saying, so-and-so, like Neetu is inviting you to be a part of the Airbnb experience and to get $25 off your first booking. So they personalized the post, right? So all of these, if you see, either references or invitations, where they have different ways in which you can use different ways that you can hack to ensure that you're creating this customer leads. Okay, and always keep experimenting. Remember, one of the things that we spoke about at the beginning about growth hacks is that as your customer matures, as their expectations change, your growth hacking will also have to change. That means you have to constantly keep experimenting. It's not a one-time done and all. It's a constant thing that you have to keep doing. Okay, so now that we spoke about multiple growth hacks, I'm sure you must be wondering, where do I start? There's so much to do, right? So I'm going to share two formats. One is a growth hack to start growth hack. Okay, so remember, growth hacking is not going to happen overnight. You have to first analyze, then you have to ideate, then you have to do the experiments, prioritize which experiments that you want to do, and then you're looking at how do we actually go and land up testing the results of that, right? So what you do is, for all of you, you've never done growth hacking, but you've identified that you have a must-have product, Okay, you've identified that you have a team that's going to focus on all of that. Then it's time for you to where do we start with? Start with just one product or one important aspect of how it is being adopted. That is signups. For example, just sign up page on your website. You want to improve the signups. Or customer acquisition, one single time. Focus on one channel first. Optimize that in that space. That could be option. Or one metric, one metric that matters. So at the beginning of today's session, I had asked you through Mentimeter to share one of your metrics, right? So this is one way for where you can start with. But drill it down. The more you drill it down to specifics and to smaller aspects, the quicker you will be able to experiment. And even if it's a win, if it's a loss, it's okay because it's a very small experiment. And if it's a win, of course, you're ready for the next one, right? So this is the way I would like you all to start. Either one of them. I'm not saying to do all of them. Either one of these, start with this. Okay. And the challenge is, how do you know which product, which aspect to focus upon? For that, we have something called a pirate funnel. Okay, and it's the AARRR funnel. Okay, so what is this pirate funnel? It helps you identify which is the weakest point of your business, and then you can focus on that and create one metric that matters for that particular item. Okay. What it does, it divides your entire company into 6 steps. Awareness.
Just wanted to give you a quick time check. It's almost 4:30.
Yeah, I'm almost at the last slide now. Okay. Awareness, acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, and referral. So let's look at how do we going to use this. Okay. Let's take the example of an organization. In awareness, we are saying how many people do you reach? So let's say it's 50,000. How many people do you want when you've reached out to them? How many people will actually visit your website? Let's say 20% of 50,000, which is 10,000. How many people will take the first important step for activation? Remember, I asked somebody, what does activation mean? Is it sign up? Is it installation? First comment? Whatever it is, right? So you put that activation. In this case, let's say 3,000, that is 30% of people who visited the website were activated. Then how many people will start paying? Okay, in this case, let's say 60% of them start paying. Retention, how many of them will come back a second time, a third time, whichever number of time. In this case, we're talking about, say, 10% of them, that is 200. And lastly, how many of them will actually refer? We're saying out of this 200, 50 of them will refer, just about 25%. Okay, so in this case, where you see, which is the weakest link in the entire cycle? It's this. The people who come back second, that means our retention rates are very low. So then it makes sense for us to focus on only this and say for the next 30 days, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever is your OMTM time frame, I'm going to focus on increasing my retention rate from 10% to 20%. Small increase, double it, whatever it is, right? I'm going to focus only on that. And then that becomes your goal problem, right? And from there, you're going to look at same method that we said. Analyze, ideate, prioritize experiments, and do the actual testing. So quickly summarizing what we did today, right? We started with understanding what is growth hacking, and that it is not just about acquiring. There's so much more about about growth hacking that we spoke about. The second was we looked at the 4 prerequisites for growth hacking. We looked at the must-have product. We looked at the 2 metrics. Then we looked at your growth cycle, and we also looked at their growth team. We understood how the growth hacking process actually works. We spoke about growth hacking for acquisition, for retention, and for monetization. Okay. We also spoke about the 6 metrics, which is to help you the growth hack to start growth hacking. So this is what we have covered in today's session. So at the end, I would wish you a lot of hacks and for you to be unstoppable in your own growth. Like I said, my name is Neetu Bansal. I'm a serial entrepreneur, an author and a speaker, an international business coach focusing on revenue growth. I'm also an alumnus of Harvard Business School, and I'm the customer advisory board of multiple organizations. You can reach out to me on my LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me on my website. Thank you and wishing you all the best.